The battlefield no longer smoked. It bled silence. Thalith Prime, once a terraformed marvel, promising verdant life, now lay gutted, its sky scraped raw by plasma burns and debris, plumes that hadn't yet fallen. Kyle Ren moved through the ruins like a revenant, his environmental suit scarred and scorched one shoulder, actuator twitching from a past impact. Every movement crunched glassed soil and fractured carbon steel beneath his boots. All Dominion frequencies had gone dark. The war was technically over, but Thalith hadn't gotten the memo. This zone was an abandoned corridor between retreating fronts, a wedge of no man's land where mercy went to die. Kael's internal HUD flickered with low-power warnings. His comms had failed 2 hours earlier, leaving only the sharp pulse of adrenaline and the hum of the arc field generator strapped across his back. He'd been searching for a recon drone lost during the final atmospheric collapse, when the scanner picked up an anomalous thermal spike buried faint but steady. The ruins around him had collapsed into the shape of a sunken crucible, once an old observatory now shredded by orbital kinetic impacts. He followed the reading, dropping into a crater ringed by half-melted glass, the dust radiating a sickly orange glow under Thalith's dim twin moons. There in the shadow of a buckled beam lay the source. At first it was unclear if the shape was even alive. Curved vertebrae, iridescent skin powdered in ash, a body curled as if in a last act of protection. The greenish hue marked her as Valari, a member of the once diplomatic species now mostly remembered through news bulletins and battlefield obituaries. Her long limbs twitched weakly, but what made Kyle pause was the brutal damage at her spine. Her tail, an essential Valari appendage used for neural regulation and societal bonding, had been severed violently, leaving only a cauterized, trembling stump. In Valari culture, that was akin to soul mutilation. This one was not a soldier. Her ceremonial bands were scorched but intact, barely legible. A former diplomat. Possibly high-ranking, possibly left for dead. Kale's rifle dropped to his side. His fingers, still gloved in battle grit and blood dust, reached down. She flinched, half-conscious. It was not recognition, just the animal instinct of one who'd been betrayed too often to trust a silhouette. He didn't speak, not out loud. His movements were deliberate, slow, an unspoken invitation rather than an intrusion. Her yellow eyes opened just enough to register his face, but not his name or allegiance. He pulled a compression patch from his belt, sealed the tail wound. The breath she released was sharp, unwilling, and then oddly calm. He didn't expect a thank you. This wasn't about diplomacy. It was about not letting one more living thing get ground into the planet's bones. He lifted her easily, weight distributed across his exosuit. Her body was too light, dehydrated, burned, starved. The tail's absence unbalanced her frame, causing her to lean unintentionally toward him, and his stabilizers auto-compensated. Dust fell in slow motion as he began the ascent out of the crater. He marked a safe extraction point on his cracked HUD, not because he believed commands still watched, but out of old habit. The silence between them was thick, not hostile, just suspended. The kind that forms when two different lives orbit around a question no one dares ask yet. The kind that only breaks once survival stops being urgent. But for now, the urgency carried them both. The terrain beyond the crater grew increasingly unstable, a patchwork of scorched obsidian and ruptured terraforming veins where water had once flowed. Kyle moved with methodical precision, each step carefully measured to avoid microfractures and hidden munitions embedded beneath the glassy surface. The wind carried the stench of ozone and scorched biomass, occasionally punctuated by a distant echo of collapsing steel. With each kilometer he traversed, the landscape resembled less of a battlefield and more of a mausoleum for the promise Thalith Prime had once held. The Valari woman in his arms never spoke, but her breathing gradually found a rhythm that told him she had not passed into unconsciousness entirely. Her skin, once shimmered with iridescent gradients, now bore only faint pulses of color where her body's biosynthetic systems fought to maintain cohesion. Her severed tail remained inert, the compression patch already stained but holding. They approached the outskirts of a collapsed outpost, an old logistics node no longer marked on command maps. Most structures had sunk at odd angles, swallowed by seismic instability, but a partial corridor remained accessible beneath the caved-in hull of a defunct dropship. Kale lowered her there out of the wind and began scanning the perimeter for defensive viability. The auto turrets had long since powered down and the interior ambient temperature held steady just above freezing. It would suffice. He scavenged a heat cell from the ship's ruined reactor core, rigged a portable field shelter with light dampeners, and only once the parameters were nominal did he return to her side. She remained where he'd left her gaze, half-lidded, but aware. Her physiology had begun to stabilize. Valeri's cells could reconstitute basic homeostasis under extreme duress, but without a functioning tail, the trauma would destabilize her neural lattice over time. He unsealed a hydration pack, placed the nozzle gently to her lips. She drank slow at first, then with more urgency. He administered a low-dose stimulant through dermal contact, her skin absorbing it with faint bioluminescent shimmer. The subtle response to treatment indicated high neural sensitivity still intact. Kale took note of her facial structure, not from any romantic impulse, but from the tactical need to understand an alien's micro-expressions. Yet something within him filed it away as beautiful nonetheless. Not classically, not in the way recruitment posters painted unity among species, but in the resilient geometry of her presence. She should have been dead. She chose not to be. The hours bled away in silence, broken only by the whisper of wind against ruined alloy and the low hum of the heat cell's stabilizer. At intervals, Kale performed equipment checks. At others, he simply sat resting against the bent fuselage with his rifle across his lap, watching her pulse strengthen in the low glow of the shelter. Something had shifted. Not overtly, not yet, but he felt it in the space between their breaths. She no longer flinched when he approached. When he adjusted the support beneath her head, her body leaned toward his hand, slightly involuntarily. Trust was too strong a word. Recognition, perhaps, or the skeletal beginnings of it. By the second day, she could sit up with support. Her voice returned first as a whisper, sharp-accented, shaped by diplomatic inflection, and then faded before becoming words. He didn't press her. Instead, he programmed the field scanner to map a route through a canyon ridge where Dominion activity had reportedly collapsed. The nearest medical relay was 2 days' march if they avoided patrol zones. The terrain ahead was unpredictable and exposed. He considered carrying her again, but she shifted, made a gesture that approximated refusal. Her pride, even broken, still held weight. So he configured a mobility sling from exosuit parts and remnants of the dropship's flight harness. She rested within it like a suspended figurehead, as he bore the frame weight distributed evenly across his spine and thighs. Along the route, the landscape changed shattered cryoforests, with frozen blossoms still clinging to fractured trunks, abandoned trenches where unmanned drones lay half-buried in frost. They moved as one, not in step, but in a rhythm shaped by necessity, endurance, and an unspoken agreement. Occasionally, she would reach forward to brace herself as his footing faltered on loose gravel, her fingers resting momentarily against his armor plates, and he would feel it even through the haptic dampeners, a small pressure warm and alive. At night, the shelter grew smaller, not in size, but in distance between them. She no longer positioned herself at the edge, but instead rested in the space where body heat could cross the invisible barrier of mistrust. Her eyes, alien reflective, bright with the strangeness of a dying species, would linger on his hands as he adjusted settings or applied repair foam to a gash on his suit. And though no words passed between them, the awareness did. He could feel it like static in the air before a storm, like the hum of a system waking up after decades in standby. Not love, not yet, but the impossible outline of something forming where none should have existed. The canyon narrowed by the third day, its walls etched with ancient Valari script barely visible under layers of ash and lichen. Kale scanned the glyphs automatically, but their meanings eluded him. They were pre-Dominion, likely pre-expansion, a language of memory etched into stone long before war made language a liability. The Valari woman stirred as they passed a partially buried monolith, her head-turning eyes narrowing faintly at the symbols. Recognition flickered across her features, not just of place, but of purpose. This was not just old ground. This was sacred ground. She raised a trembling hand toward an outcropping of polished stone that glowed faintly under his torchlight. Without speaking, Kael adjusted his route, following her subtle gestures through a jagged cleft that led downward deeper into the canyon's spine. They descended into darkness until the torchlight struck alloy. A dome structure emerged from the dust, a collapsed satellite chamber buried in time. Its walls bore the seal of the Celestark Exchange, long predating the current trade wars, back when Valari ambassadors had moved through the galaxy like living channels of peace. The chamber's outer doors responded to her proximity, flickering with dim energy and sliding open with a reluctant groan of ancient servos. Inside, time had stood still. Crystalline conduits lined the walls, dark now, but intact. In the center, a recessed medical platform waited half-buried in detritus, but still structurally viable. Kael swept the space with a biothermic scan. The systems were offline but not damaged, just dormant. He moved quickly, clearing debris, accessing the central column's interface, and rerouting emergency power from the old dome's geothermal core. The room pulsed awake, faint bioluminescent threads crawling across the floor like veins finding a pulse. The platform lit up. Diagnostic tables unfolded. The air changed, no longer dead and sterile, but humming with presence. This wasn't just a medical chamber. It was a resonance cradle, a fusion healing architecture designed for Valari trauma repair. Neural mapping, biosymbiosis, cellular restoration, all layered into one ancient technology built to work with the Valari's unique physiology. Kael turned to her eyes, narrowing as the system began to ping off her neural patterns. The interface warned of incomplete pathways, missing biological anchors. Without a tail, the process could destabilize. But then the system recalibrated, sensing proximity, adapting parameters. The screen flashed a new message in overlapping symbols. External interface suggested. Synchronized host. Her gaze shifted from the console to Kael. No words passed between them. The meaning was implicit. The cradle required dual integration. A human link might stabilize her system, but it also meant full exposure. Neural transparency, shared memory, emotional bleed, a bond more invasive than any known alliance treaty or species pact. He stepped forward without hesitation. The resonance chamber accepted both of them, biotissue gel climbing up to the collarbone subdermal neural pads, adhering to spine, temple, and palms. Her body floated next to his eyes, half-lidded. Her severed tail connected to a lattice of synthetic extensions shimmering with dormant data. The system initiated sync. First sensory merger, then memory integration, then genetic resonance. Kael felt her thoughts before he recognized them. Pain moved through his nerves like music in reverse, sharp, dissonant raw. The moment her tail was severed, the screams she hadn't voiced, the betrayal by her own delegation as they boarded the Dominion carrier and left her to die. His muscles spasmed, not in protest, but in empathy. In return, she saw his battlefield, not the enemy, but the years of holding broken lines of dragging comrades behind cover while airstrikes turned cities to dust. His grief filtered through her skin, made manifest in light patterns that ran across her shoulder blades. The interface adapted, accepted the confluence, and adjusted their neurochemical equilibrium. Their breath synchronized. Heart rates pulsed in unison. Data modules unfurled schematics, protocols, hybrid bioforms. From their merged consciousness rose a new interface, a tail design, not just a replacement but an extension, a biomechanical structure tailored to her nervous system and his engineering patterns. Muscle fiber laced with titanium sinew, sensory nodules bound with memory cores. The system printed the limb from nanopolymer mesh and synthetic nerve gel, threading the graft into her spine through an almost loving weave of energy. She arched as it fused, not in pain, but in awakening, and Kael felt everything. Every neural signal her body fired, every tremor of identity reasserting itself. Her presence flooded the shared stream like sunlight through glass, vast and fluid, filled with contradictions, rage and serenity, fear and desire, isolation and the sudden sharp pang of connection. Not romantic, not yet, but something deeper, a communion beyond protocol. She felt his calloused hands move even though they remained still. She traced the scarring on his shoulder from a burn long since healed, saw the vision he'd carried in secret. A home never destroyed, a planet not forsaken. His dream grafted onto hers like roots binding across species. The tail flicked once, then again, its motion graceful, deliberate. She rotated it experimentally, balancing herself for the first time since her exile. The platform disengaged. They stood unsteady but complete. They did not speak, but they walked forward. Together, the march beyond the chamber held no hesitation. Kyl's stride adjusted instinctively to match hers, while Celira moved with increasing precision, her new tail slicing through air in elegant arcs that mirrored thought rather than motion. The neural graft had exceeded even his theoretical projections. What had begun as mechanical augmentation now operated as organic expression. Each flicker of bioluminescent pulse along the appendage spoke emotion processing data, signaling intent. More than balance, more than function, it had become a language between them, alive with residual resonance. The landscape outside offered no time for wonder. Dominion scouts had deployed across the plateau, their silhouettes jagged against the storm-bent sky. Drones pulsed across the ridges, their signal ping silent but relentless. In the shadow of collapse, the Dominion had returned not to rescue, but to secure artifacts to erase evidence to silence any surviving anomalies. Kael and Celira moved in tandem now, not as fugitive and savior, not as human and Valari, but as an emergent node of a new battlefield logic. She took point. Her tail traced holographic lines through the air, signaling terrain shifts, warning of sensor traps estimating firing vectors from the terrain. Kael's HUD synced to her movements, overlaying her sensory awareness atop his visual interface. For the first time in his career, the tactical display moved before he could think. They crossed a broken magrail line and entered the husk of an atmospheric relay station. Dominion patrols had swarmed this sector 2 nights ago. The wreckage still steamed. Kael ducked under a bent support strut, rotating his rifle toward the west tunnel just as her tail brushed his lower back with warning. He froze, recalibrated angle. From the thermal feed, a scout emerged. 1 second too early, and Kael's weapon would have lit the dark in the wrong direction. He waited. Her tail arched behind her like a predator's lure, shimmering with pulsed decoy frequencies. The scout's optics distorted. A half-breath later, Kael's shot pierced the visor between readings. They moved again. 2 more kills, then 4. Their neural link no longer buzzed with friction. It flowed like current between exposed wire and storm cloud. Not telepathy, not command, just certainty. At one junction, she vaulted onto a fractured girder above him, spinning midair while her tail launched a fragmentary spike into a Dominion uplink drone. As it burst, Kael advanced beneath her arc and launched a charge into the relay node, disabling the tracking field long enough for them to pass unseen. She landed behind him a second later, tail spiraling down like a ribbon made of mind fire. His breath caught once, not from strain, but from the elegance of it all. Celira Valen was no longer broken. She was rewritten. By nightfall, they reached the outer ruins of the old water filtration sector, one of the first settlements before Thyleth's transformation into a forward outpost. Here, the Dominion had installed a signal jamming array laced into the core of the region's geothermal grid. Disabling it would open an escape corridor north toward the evac basin. But the array was armored, shielded, and pulsed with kinetic dampeners that would disrupt any ordinary infiltration, except that neither of them were ordinary anymore. Kael dropped to one knee, deploying a series of node spikes around the perimeter. Celira stepped into the circle. Her tail connected directly with the central harmonic conduit, adjusting its waveform to resonate with the array's defensive frequencies. Her body trembled not from pain, but from synchronization. Kael read the signals pulsing between her and the machine, saw how her breathing shifted with each adjustment. His hands moved rapidly across the control interface, following the pattern of her tail's guidance. The lockdown disengaged, the node fell quiet, the path opened. But Dominion reinforcements had already converged. 4 transports landed at equidistant points along the ridge. Exoframes deployed in 12-unit phalanx formations. Orbital drop suits ignited above. The sky turned amber with threat. No time to run, no chance to hide. She stepped beside him, tail lifting like a banner charged with stormlight. Kale felt her heartbeat through his own chest. He adjusted the grip on his rifle. She rotated her stance limbs aligned for maximum kinetic discharge. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The first blast came from the northeast flank, a plasma bolt intended to scatter. Celira absorbed it through a deflection matrix. Her tail generated midair, redirecting the energy toward Kale's gauntlet. The circuit completed. His return fire burst with amplified force, taking down the front row in a single wave. They advanced. She launched herself across the inclined tail, whipping downward into the Dominion's forward unit, snapping a shock emitter onto the central frame. Kael followed with a kinetic wave burst, disorienting the line behind her. They pivoted around each other like twin blades of a single machine precision elegance annihilation. One of the Dominion officers managed to target her tail base, but Kael intercepted the trajectory before the shot left the barrel. She spun in acknowledgement, her tail brushing his arm with silent gratitude, leaving a trail of glowing code across his sleeve. Their enemies began to falter, not from losses, but from disorientation. They weren't fighting two bodies, they were fighting a bond. The battle ended in minutes, not because the Dominion surrendered, but because the interface between Kael and Celira rendered the outcome inevitable. They didn't simply defeat the enemy, they rewrote the rules of engagement. And as the final drone fell from the sky in spirals of smoke, Kael lowered his weapon and looked at her, the echoes of shared thoughts still fading from the corners of his mind. She turned her gaze toward him, and for the first time since the resonance bond, he felt not just presence, but peace. The comms flare rose into the thinning atmosphere as Dominion protocols scrambled to reassert control over the region. It wasn't just the loss of a forward unit or the collapse of the array, they had registered something else, a surge in quantum signal activity far beyond standard bandwidth. Kael and Celira's link had tripped sensors woven into the orbital network that even the Dominion didn't fully understand. Somewhere in the depths of the Celestark archives, ancient failsafes had been reactivated, and now both sides of the galactic divide were paying attention. They didn't retreat. There was nowhere to run. Instead, they climbed the shattered spine of Thalith Prime's western escarpment, reaching the high plateau, where the old weather towers stood like fractured ribs against the sky. From here, the entire basin unfolded before them, broken, yes, but seeded with possibility. Beneath the topsoil, Kael's earlier mapping had revealed old hydro veins now recharged by the geothermal discharge caused by their fight. The floodgates had not opened, but they trembled. Word spread fast. From survivor camps and hidden relay outposts, engineers and medical teams began to converge toward the plateau. Not under orders, but drawn by something subtler. Celira's tail pulsed with bioluminescent threads transmitting across dormant Velari channels. Long thought severed. Her signal merged with Kael's repurposed field codes, forming a language neither military nor political. Not command, not surrender, just presence. Dominion reinforcements arrived with caution. At their head stood Virex Sondar, once an understudy to Celira in the diplomatic halls of Virelin Cradle. He emerged from a drop skiff cloaked in regalia, flanked by armored delegates. His eyes scanned the terrain, landing finally on her. She didn't move to meet him. Instead, she extended her tail in a gesture once reserved for peace, offering a signal forgotten by most and unreadable to all but the oldest of their kind. He hesitated, then advanced. Kael stood to one side, armor still scorched, rifle holstered but exposed. The Dominion entourage began to deploy mobile scanning equipment, their tech bristling with quantum analyzers, resonance stabilizers, and neural pattern monitors. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to confirm the anomaly, to claim it. Then the sky darkened again, not with storm, but with policy. A second vessel descended, sleeker, quieter, bearing the insignia of the Dominion's first conclave. Narissa Kalis, youngest first consul in Velari history, stepped onto Thalith Prime, wearing robes of cerulean and black, her unbroken tail coiled with authority. Her presence shifted the balance instantly. Virex stepped back. She surveyed Kael and Celira not as people, but as vectors in a calculation she had already begun to solve. Her delegation spoke little. Their instruments did the talking, gathering data from the pulsing patterns of Celira's tail and the ambient code resonance bleeding from Kael's armor. Their conclusion would not be scientific. It would be doctrinal. They would call it aberration. But Kael had anticipated this. From the plateau, he activated the old colony's broadcast relay. Across fractured frequencies, his signal reached satellites long dormant, reawakening the Celestark Exchange's original verification protocols. The ancient trade codes, encrypted in layers, no Dominion override, could untangle. Now pulsed through Celira's tail, bound irreversibly to her biological rhythm and to the link they had formed. Not data, not keys, a living system. Nerissa demanded transfer. Kael replied with calibration. The network recognized only her heartbeat, only their bond. The plateau's system surged as the geothermal core connected to the trade lattice, transforming the terrain beneath them into a new node, one the Dominion could not claim without recognition. The confrontation escalated with silence. The delegates moved to initiate extraction. But Celira stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, cut through wind and tension alike. She stated her name not as a plea, but as a declaration. Celira Valen, former envoy, citizen of Theleth Prime, custodian of the living code. Her declaration held weight not because it asked for permission, but because the systems around them responded. The irrigation network reinitialized. The sky cleared incrementally. The once failing colony shimmered with purpose. Nerissa moved forward and invoked the right of precedence, a final measure rarely used in which claimants to the same protocol must enter neural engagement to determine dominance. But Celira refused. Instead, she invoked the ancient fallback clause, right of champion. As a citizen, she nominated another to stand in her place. Kael stepped forward before her words had even finished. The silence that followed was not surprise, but awe. A human, not trained in Valari mental tactics, not conditioned in protocol combat, but bonded. The Dominion could not refuse. The law had been triggered. Nerissa agreed, her expression unreadable. The chamber was prepared, hastily constructed from resonance nodes and memory anchors salvaged from the ruins. They entered the neural lattice at dusk. Within the shared space, Kael found himself in a domain that shimmered like thought made flesh. Nerissa's presence moved like a blade, elegant, cold, curved in the way language could never defend against. She struck first, overwhelming his sense with images of hierarchy, of order, of centuries of Dominion power. He resisted not with defense, but with memory. He showed her Celira's first step after the tail graft, her breath against his skin as their pulses aligned, the way she had looked at the broken colony and seen impossibly a future. Nerissa faltered. Kael pressed deeper, letting the bond flow forward, not just thought, but feeling, not power, but trust. The lattice shifted. The old systems responded. The codes rewrote themselves. Dominion authority fragmented. A new language formed. The lattice broke in silence, not with sound, but with the soft unraveling of a thread that had once held the old order together. Nerissa withdrew from the neural chamber, her composure intact, but her aura dimmed. Her tail's bioluminescence faded to a dull amber. She did not speak as she exited the chamber, leaving behind the traces of defeat like footprints on scorched stone. Kael emerged slower, the echo of her mental weight still pressing faintly against the back of his mind. But the moment his boots touched soil and his eyes met Celira's, the last fragments dissipated. The link between them shimmered intact, expanded stronger than any artificial alliance treaty. From the plateau, the structures of Theleth Prime responded. Machines long dormant awakened, geothermal turbines whirred to life, water systems pulsed with precision, quantum interface nodes blinked into cohesion. The planetary systems had not merely accepted their bond, they had integrated it. Elder Thornan, bent from age, but eyes sharp with memory, arrived days later aboard a repurposed survey skiff. He brought with him data from the Celestark observers, long thought vanished, who had been watching the Dominion from the margins. He confirmed what the pulse had already suggested. Theleth Prime, now qualified as a sovereign node recognized not by military force, but by systemic resonance. The codes that had once merely governed trade had evolved. They had become sentient logic, born not of engineering, but of connection. Celira stood beside Kale in the diplomatic corps they assembled in the basin's heart. No banners were raised, no hymns sung. But among the species who gathered human Valari and others drawn by the broadcast, something older than protocol was felt. The codes were alive, and they had chosen. Reconstruction began with little ceremony. Kale reactivated the colony's atmospheric filters, while Celira rerouted the geothermal veins into nutrient circulators. Where once stood ruins, now emerged biosynthetic gardens grown from both technology and memory. She moved among them with ease, her tail now more than prosthetic, an extension of both will and language. It transmitted data when she touched the soil. It shimmered with defensive signals when Kale was near danger. It pulsed in patterns Kale could read without translation. Days became weeks. And the first sign of their shared future came not from code or battle, but from life. Her biostructure shifted subtly. Not in illness, not in stress, but in convergence. The fusion from the resonance bond had opened latent Valari pathways, genetic intersections, once thought incompatible. She carried not just the code, but a continuation. Their child would not be the first hybrid, but it would be the first born from mutual choice, from balance. No augmentation, no programming. A being of synthesis grown from silence, built in defiance of division. Kale understood the implications faster than words could express. He saw it in her breathing, felt it in the way her tail now coiled more protectively, not around herself, but around him. Delegations returned. Not from conquest, but curiosity. Not to control, but to witness. Representatives from the Celestark Exchange arrived bearing relics seeking to study the anomaly. Kale let them in. Celira taught them the new language. It was not stored in databases or repeatable by AI. It lived in gesture, in shared breath, in the rhythm of pulse against palm. The code spread not like a virus, but like a seed. Each time a true connection formed between two beings, between idea and emotion, between purpose and presence, it pulsed, recorded, and adapted. Within months, Theleth Prime had become a nexus. The Dominion, unable to undo what had been grown, signed an accord. Nerissa did not return. Virax sent emissaries bearing apologies forged in dry formality. Kyle didn't care. He had work to do. With Celira at his side, they established learning centers built not from curriculum, but from experience. Children arrived from 12 different species. Some of them already bore signs of resonance tails that shimmered fingertips that hummed against interface stone. Kyle's days were filled with blueprints and irrigation tunnels. His nights were wrapped in her silence, which had always said more than speeches. Celira rarely spoke of her exile anymore. She no longer needed to. When the day came for formal recognition, the ceremonial robes they wore were simple. His bore the insignia of Thaleth's new seal, a spiral of connected dots interwoven with a vertical tail. Hers shimmered with living threads of quantum ink. She stepped forward before the assembled Alliance delegates, her posture regal, tail curling behind her like a flame of intention. Kale followed his steps, echoing slightly against the polished stone of the central forum. Between them, the codes pulsed softly in the air, visible only to those whose minds had touched another in true trust. No oaths were sworn, no contracts signed, only a joining. The child they would raise, half memory, half miracle, would not inherit legacy. It would inherit possibility. From the ruins of war to the genesis of a new world, the story of Kael Ren and Celira Velan was never just about survival. It was about defiance, not with weapons, but with intimacy. In a galaxy fractured by conquest and protocol, their connection rewrote the rules, not through treaties, but through trust. From a severed tail to a living quantum network, their bond became the keystone of a new civilization, their shared breath transforming into the pulse of planetary rebirth. And as Thaleth Prime blossomed into the galaxy's first nexus of conscious diplomacy, their legacy spread not by decree, but by emotion. Every touch, every choice, every heartbeat carved a message into the fabric of space. Love is not weakness. It is design, it is architecture, it is future. Thank you for journeying with us across the stars. If this story moved you, Consider subscribing to the channel for more tales of humanity's courage, connection, and cosmic defiance. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment hit you the hardest? And remember, in the cold void of space, even the smallest act of compassion can rewrite a galaxy.